The twin suns of Nova 7 cast long shadows across the dusty mining settlement as Kim Hanna wiped down the counter of her small noodle shop. At 70 years old, her hands still moved with practiced efficiency, preparing the lunch rush for the colony's 3,000 residents. The aroma of beef broth and fresh vegetables filled the cramped space that had been her home for the past 15 years. Outside her window, massive mining mechs thundered past, their metal feet shaking the ground as they hauled precious ore from the deep tunnels. Nova 7 wasn't much to look at, a collection of prefab buildings and industrial complexes scattered across a barren plateau. But it was home. The miners, engineers, and their families who lived here had built something real from nothing. Unfortunately, they weren't the only ones who had noticed the colony's growing prosperity. Security Chief Brock dominated the doorway as he entered, his 7-foot reptilian frame barely fitting through the entrance. The vexed scales were a sickly green color, and his yellow eyes held the cold intelligence of a predator. Behind him followed his pet humans, Officer Kane and Sergeant Walsh, both men who had sold their souls for a share of the corruption that flowed through Nova 7 like poison. Double quotes Mrs. Kim. Brock's voice rumbled like grinding stone. We need to discuss your monthly contribution to colony security. Hannah didn't look up from her prep work. She'd been expecting this visit. The protection fees had started small 6 months ago. Just a few credits to ensure her shop stayed safe. But greed, she'd learned, was like a black hole. It only grew hungrier. I already paid this month, she said quietly. Continuing to chop vegetables, Kane stepped forward, his hand resting on his plasma pistol. There's been an adjustment, Grandma. Rates just doubled. The chief here thinks your little noodle stand might be vulnerable to accidents. Round the shop, the lunch crowd had gone silent. Workers who moments before had been laughing and sharing stories now stared at their bowls, unwilling to meet anyone's eyes. Fear had a way of making people very small. Hannah finally looked up, her weathered face calm. I pay what we agreed. Nothing more. Brock's laugh was like rocks tumbling down a cliff. Old woman, you misunderstand your situation. This isn't a negotiation. You're right, Hannah said, returning to her vegetables. It isn't. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Kane's face flushed red with anger, but Brock raised a claw hand, stopping him from drawing his weapon. The Vec had survived 3 decades of colonial enforcement by reading people, and something in the old woman's tone made his predator instincts twitch. We'll be back tomorrow for the money, Brock said slowly. All of it, plus interest for your stubbornness. They left without another word, but Hannah knew this wasn't over. It never was with their type. The next morning came with the thunder of boots on metal decking. Kane burst through her door at dawn, followed by 4 colonial security officers in full combat gear. Their armor gleamed black in the early light, and their weapons hummed with deadly energy. Surprise inspection, Kane announced, his voice echoing off the shop's walls. We've received reports of illegal weapons trafficking from this location. Hannah stood behind her counter in her simple work clothes, looking impossibly small next to the armored men. You won't find anything here except noodles and soup. We'll see about that. Kane nodded to his men, who began tearing through her shop with systematic brutality. They overturned tables, smashed dishes, and scattered her carefully organized supplies across the floor. The sound of breaking ceramic filled the air like gunshots. For 20 minutes they searched, growing more frustrated as they found nothing but legitimate business supplies. Finally, Kane himself entered her storage room. The sound of boxes being moved echoed through the shop, followed by his triumphant shout. Well, look what we have here. He emerged carrying a sealed military crate, the kind used to transport high-energy weapons. The serial numbers were still visible, marking it as property of the Terran Defense Force inside. Nestled in protective foam were 6 military-grade plasma cells, each one capable of powering a heavy combat rifle for months. Kim Hanna. Kane's voice carried the satisfaction of a job well done. You're under arrest for trafficking military weapons to insurgent groups. These plasma cells are restricted technology, possession of which carries a mandatory sentence of 20 years in the penal mines. The gathered crowd of mourning customers gasped. Several people backed toward the door, not wanting to be associated with whatever was happening. Hannah just stood there, looking at the crate with sad, knowing eyes. "I've never seen that before in my life," she said quietly. "Of course you haven't." Kane's smile was cold as winter on an airless moon. "That's what they all say. The colonial courthouse was a joke, and everyone knew it. Judge Morrison had been bought and paid for years ago, his decisions flowing like water in whatever direction Brock pointed. The trial, if it could be called that, lasted exactly 47 minutes. The evidence was presented. A few witnesses testified about Hannah's suspicious behavior, and the verdict was read, guilty on all counts. Before sentencing, Judge Morrison said, consulting his tablet, "The defendant is entitled to one personal communication, as per colonial law." Hannah nodded. "I'd like to call my son." Kane laughed, the sound sharp and mocking. "What's your boy gonna do, Grandma? Send a strongly worded letter." As Hannah was led to the communication booth, other officers joined in the laughter. What could some old woman's son possibly do from halfway across the galaxy? They were about to find out that sometimes the universe had a sense of humor, and sometimes that humor came with enough firepower to glass a small moon. The communication booth hummed with static as the quantum relay established connection across 47 light-years of empty space. Kim Hanna sat in the cramped metal chair, her weathered hands steady as she activated the transmitter. The guards outside were still chuckling about her one phone call, placing bets on whether her son would even answer. They had no idea who they were dealing with. The holographic display flickered to life, showing the familiar face that had kissed her goodbye 25 years ago when he left for the military academy. Park Min-ho looked older now, his black hair streaked with silver at the temples, but his eyes still held the same determined spark she remembered from his childhood. "Min-ho here," she said softly, using the pet name she'd called him since he could barely walk. Her voice carried across the void between stars, warm with maternal love despite her circumstances. "There's been a small problem at the shop. Could you help your old mother?" Behind the reinforced glass, Kane and his officers erupted in laughter. Officer Walsh slapped his knee, pointing at the old woman through the window. "Look at Granny making her little phone call. What's Junior gonna do? File a complaint with customer service." Kane wiped tears from his eyes. "Maybe he'll send her a care package, some cookies and a strongly worded letter." The other guards joined in, their mocking laughter echoing through the detention center like the cries of scavenging birds. They couldn't see Minho's face. They couldn't see how his jaw muscles tightened, or how his knuckles went white as he gripped the arm of his command chair. They couldn't see the way his eyes went from warm brown to cold steel in the space of her heartbeat. "Mother," his voice remained calm, professional, the tone of a man accustomed to command. "Are you hurt?" "No, little dragon. But they say I've done something I haven't done. They want to send me away for a very long time." Minho's AI assistant, a sophisticated program named Arya, immediately began processing background data, surveillance feeds, financial records, communication logs, and security reports flowed across his personal display in streams of light. Within seconds, she had constructed a complete picture of Nova 7's corruption network. Admiral Arya's synthetic voice was crisp and efficient, Nova 7 colonial records show systematic extortion, evidence planting, and judicial corruption spanning 6 years. Security Chief Brock has embezzled approximately 47 million credits. The current charges against your mother appear to be retaliation for refusing increased protection payments. The bridge of the TDS Vengeance fell silent. 26 officers and crew members watched their admiral process this information, and those who had served with him longest recognized the signs. Park Min-ho angry was a force of nature. Park Min-ho protecting family was something far more dangerous. Signal the fleet, he said quietly, his voice carrying the authority of a man who had commanded fleets in 3 major conflicts. Emergency deployment. All ships. Commander Lee Ji-woo, his second-in-command, hesitated at her station. Her fingers hovered over the communication controls as she processed the order. Sir. Nova 7 is a civilian colony under Terran protection. We'd need authorization from Colonial Command before. My mother. Min-ho interrupted, his voice still calm but carrying an edge that could cut diamond. Is a civilian on that colony. The bridge crew exchanged glances. They all knew the Admiral's service record, the Battle of Kepler Station, where he'd held off 3 enemy dreadnoughts with a single cruiser. The Siege of Titan Base, where his tactical brilliance had saved 50,000 civilians. The man who had earned the nickname Iron Fist wasn't someone you wanted as an enemy. Aye, sir, Ji-woo said, activating the fleet communications ray. All ships. Emergency deployment. Stand by for jump coordinates. Across the Terran Defense Forces 3rd Fleet, alarms began to sound. Aboard 6 heavy cruisers, 12 destroyers, and 3 support vessels, thousands of crew members rushed to battle stations. Fusion reactors hummed to full power. Weapon systems came online, and hyperspace engines began their charging sequences. The TDS Vengeance itself was a sight to behold. 800 meters of military perfection, bristling with plasma cannons, missile batteries, and defensive systems that could stop a meteor shower. Her hull was scarred from a dozen battles, each mark a testament to her crew's courage and skill. In the communication booth, Hannah continued speaking to her son. Unaware of the military response her simple request was generating. Don't worry too much, Min-ho. Your old mother has survived worse than this. I know you have, he replied, and for a moment his command mask slipped, revealing the little boy who used to run to her for comfort after skinning his knee. But you shouldn't have to. Back on the detention center, Kane was still enjoying his joke at Hannah's expense. Hey boys, think her son's gonna come riding to the rescue. Maybe he's got a fighter pilot license. The guards burst into fresh laughter, their voices carrying through the facility like the braying of donkeys. None of them noticed the subtle change in the quantum communication ray's energy signature. None of them realized that their mockery was being transmitted across space along with Hannah's conversation, and none of them understood that 47 light-years away, every word they spoke was being recorded by military intelligence systems. Fleet status report. Min-ho commanded, all ships report ready for hyperspace jump. Ji-woo announced, estimated travel time to Nova 7, 14 hours, 37 minutes, engineering. I want maximum speed. Override safety protocols if necessary. Chief Engineer Kim Tae-young's voice crackled over the intercom. Sir, pushing the hyperspace engines beyond rated capacity could. My mother, Min-ho said simply, doesn't have time for safety protocols. Understood. Admiral, we'll get you there. Yes. The conversation in the booth continued. Hannah's voice remained steady despite her circumstances. She spoke of small things, the weather on Nova 7, her regulars at the noodle shop, the new mining equipment that had been installed last month. But between the words, Min-ho heard everything she wasn't saying. He heard the fear she wouldn't voice, the loneliness of facing this alone, the quiet dignity with which she faced an impossible situation. "I have to go now, little dragon," she said finally. "Take care of yourself." "Mother," Minho's voice carried across the stars with absolute certainty. "I'll see you soon." The transmission ended, leaving Kane and his men still chuckling in their ignorance. They had no idea that they had just declared war on one of humanity's most decorated military commanders. They had no idea that their laughter had been recorded, analyzed, and filed as evidence in what would soon become a very thorough investigation. And they certainly had no idea that in less than 15 hours, the sky above Nova 7 would fill with enough firepower to reduce their entire colony to radioactive dust. Some phone calls the universe was about to teach them were more important than others. The hyperspace tunnel collapsed behind the Terran defense fleet like a closing mountain. Space-time. 21 warships materialized in Nova 7's outer system in perfect diamond formation, their hulls gleaming silver against the star field. The sight was breathtaking and terrifying, a display of military precision that spoke of countless hours of training and absolute discipline. Admiral Park Min-ho stood on the bridge of the TDS Vengeance, watching the tactical display as his fleet's sensors swept the system. The massive Dreadnought's bridge was a cathedral of technology, with holographic displays showing every asteroid, mining platform, and communication satellite within 100 million kilometers. His officers worked with quiet efficiency, their movements precise and purposeful. "System scan complete, Admiral," reported Lieutenant Commander Yoon Sora from the sensor station. "Nova 7 colonial fleet consists of 4 patrol boats and 2 cargo escorts. No significant military presence detected." Min-ho nodded, his hands clasped behind his back as he studied the data streams flowing across his personal display. The colony looked so small from here, just a pale dot orbiting an unremarkable yellow star. Hard to believe something so insignificant could house so much corruption. "Communications, open a channel to Colonial Command. Standard diplomatic protocols." "Aye, sir." "Channel open. Down on Nova 7 surface." Traffic control operator Honjasu nearly choked on his coffee when the proximity alarm started. Screaming, his monitoring station, normally quiet except for the occasional cargo hauler, suddenly lit up like a festival fireworks display. 21 massive energy signatures had just appeared at the edge of sensor range. Moving in formation toward the planet, Chief Brock, Jesu's voice cracked as he activated the emergency comm. "We've got incoming ships, big ones." Military configuration in his office. Security Chief Brock was counting the weekly bribes when the call came through. The reptilian Vec barely looked up from his pile of credit chips, his yellow eyes focused on more important matters than some nervous human's panic. Routine patrol. He growled into the communicator, his forked tongue flicking out to taste the air. "Happens every few months. Humans like to flex their muscles, show off their shiny toys. They'll take some sensor readings, file a report, and jump back to wherever they came from." But even as he spoke, something nagged at his predator instincts. 21 ships was a lot for a routine patrol. That was more like a battle fleet, sir. Jesu's voice was getting higher with stress. "These aren't patrol boats. I'm reading 6 heavy cruisers, 12 destroyers, and something big, really big. The computer is classifying it as a Dreadnought-class vessel." Brock's counting stopped. Dreadnoughts weren't sent for routine patrols. Dreadnoughts were sent to end wars on the mining platforms scattered across Nova 7's surface. Workers stopped their machines to stare up at the sky, even without telescopes. They could see the tiny points of light moving against the stars, metal predators sliding through the void with deadly grace. The atmospheric processes hummed nervously, their AI systems detecting elevated stress levels among the human population. Captain Walsh burst into Brock's office without knocking, his face pale with fear. "Chief, you need to see this. The lead ship is broadcasting on all frequencies. The wall display activated, showing a stern-faced human in the blue uniform of a Terran admiral." His voice was calm, professional, but carried the kind of authority that came from commanding fleets in actual combat. "This is Admiral Park Min-ho of the Terran Defense Force, 3rd Fleet. Aboard the TDS Vengeance, I am requesting immediate communication with colonial leadership regarding a matter of personal concern." Brock's blood went cold, not because of the military titles or the obvious display of force, but because of something in the Admiral's tone. This wasn't official business. This was personal. "Get me everything we have on this, Admiral Park." Brock snarled at Walsh. "Service, record, family connections, recent assignments, everything." While Walsh scrambled to access military databases, the fleet continued its approach. The TDS Vengeance was a monument to human engineering, 800 meters of armor depth. Bristling with weapons that could crack planets, her escort vessels moved like a pack of wolves, maintaining perfect formation despite traveling at thousands of kilometers per hour. In the colonial prison, Kim Hannah sat quietly in her cell, unaware that the sky above her was filling with her son's response to her phone call. She hummed an old lullaby, the same one she'd sung to Minho when he was small and afraid of thunderstorms. "Sir." Walsh's voice was barely a whisper as he read from his tablet. "Admiral Park Min-ho, Age 47, Commanding Officer, 3rd Fleet, Rapid Response Division. Service record includes the Battle of Kepler Station, the Siege of Titan Base, and the Centauri campaign. Decorations include the Star of Valor, the Fleet Combat Medal, and the Colonial Defense Cross." Brock's claws dug into his desk as he processed this information. This wasn't some desk admiral sending strongly worded letters. This was a war hero, with enough firepower to glass their entire planet. "Known family?" Brock asked, though he was beginning to suspect he already knew the answer. "Mother, Kim Hannah, age 70, resident of Nova 7 Colony, currently." Walsh's voice trailed off as he checked the prison records. "Currently incarcerated on charges of weapons trafficking." The silence in the office was deafening outside. The first of the destroyers was becoming visible to the naked eye, a gleaming spear of metal against the black sky. "This is Admiral Park Min-ho of the Terran Defense Force." The transmission repeated across every communication channel on the planet. "I'm here about my mother." 5 simple words that changed everything. Not "I'm here on official business" or "I'm conducting a routine inspection." He was here about his mother. Personal, direct, unmistakably clear. The mining crews abandoned their equipment and rushed for the emergency shelters. Colonial administrators locked themselves in their offices and began frantically deleting files. The smart ones started composing resignation letters. Kane, still strutting round the prison facility like he owned the place, finally understood what was happening when one of his men showed him the tactical display. 21 warships led by a dreadnought that could probably destroy their entire colonial fleet with a single salvo. "Sir," the technician's voice was shaking. "They're requesting landing clearance for diplomatic shuttles." Kane's swagger evaporated like morning mist. All his bravado, all his casual cruelty, suddenly seemed very small in the face of military reality. He'd arrested the mother of one of humanity's most decorated admirals. He'd laughed about it. He'd made jokes. And now that admiral was here, with enough firepower to turn Nova 7 into an asteroid field. The TDS Vengeance settled into high orbit, her massive bulk blocking out part of the sun. The other ships took positions round the planet like pieces on a chessboard, covering every possible escape route. It was a display of force that spoke louder than any threats or ultimatums. Admiral Park Min-ho stood on his bridge, looking down at the world where his mother sat in a prison cell for crimes she didn't commit. His fleet was ready. His marines were armed and eager. His weapons could end this in minutes. But first, he was going to give them a chance to do the right thing. Open communications to Colonial Command. He ordered, "It's time to have a conversation." The Colonial Command Center had never seen so much activity. Computer terminals beeped frantically as data streams flooded in from across the galaxy, painting a picture that made Brock's reptilian blood freeze in his veins. The massive Vex security chief stood hunched over the main display, his yellow eyes scanning report after report about the man whose mother he had imprisoned. Admiral Park Min-ho, the ghost of Kepler Station, the man who had held off the Zephyrian assault fleet with nothing but a damaged cruiser and pure determination, the tactical genius who had turned the tide at Centauri Prime, saving 2 million colonists from alien invasion. The youngest admiral in Terran history, with a kill count that included 3 enemy dreadnoughts and countless smaller vessels. "This can't be right," Brock growled, his clawed fingers leaving gouges in the metal console. "She's just an old woman who makes noodles." Captain Walsh stood beside him, his face pale as death as he scrolled through more intelligence files. "Sir, the records are clear. Kim Hanna, mother of Admiral Park Min-ho. She's been sending him care packages for 25 years, family photos. Show them together at his academy graduation. Outside the command center's reinforced windows, the TDS Vengeance hung in orbit like a metallic moon. Her hull was scarred from countless battles, each mark a testament to the violence she had survived. Point defense turrets tracked imaginary targets with mechanical precision, while her main guns remained ominously silent but clearly ready. The communication ray crackled to life, filling the room with Admiral Park's calm, professional voice. It was the tone of a man accustomed to being obeyed, someone who had commanded fleets in the darkest corners of space where humanity fought for survival against alien horrors. "Colonial Command. This is Admiral Park Min-ho requesting immediate diplomatic communication with your senior leadership. I believe there has been a misunderstanding regarding my mother's legal situation." Brock's fault. Tongue flicked out nervously. The Admiral's tone was polite, almost friendly, but there was steel underneath the words. This was the voice of a man who had stared down alien war chiefs and made them blink first. "Hatch me through," Brock ordered, straightening to his full 7-foot height. He had intimidated countless humans over the years. Surely one more wouldn't be different, Fleet Admiral or not. The holographic projector activated, showing Admiral Park standing on his bridge. He looked older than his service photos, with silver threading through his dark hair, but his eyes held the sharp intelligence of a predator. Behind him, the bridge crew worked with quiet efficiency, their movements speaking of absolute discipline and readiness. "Security Chief Brock, I presume," Park said, inclining his head slightly in greeting. "Thank you for taking my call. I'm here to discuss what I believe is a rather significant error in your judicial system." Brock puffed out his chest, trying to project the authority that had served him well for 6 years of corruption and extortion. "Admiral, with respect, this is a colonial matter. Your mother was arrested on solid evidence of weapons trafficking. The case has been tried and decided according to local law." Park's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes, a flash of the cold fury that had made alien commanders flee in terror. "I see, and the solid evidence would." It happened to be military-grade plasma cells with Terran Defense Force serial numbers. The question hit like a physical blow. How could he possibly know those details? The evidence was sealed, the trial records classified, unless my AI has been quite thorough in its investigation. Park continued, as if reading Brock's thoughts. "Fascinating what you can discover. when you have access to TDF logistics databases. Those particular plasma cells were reported stolen from a transport convoy 6 months ago. The theft was blamed on pirates, but the investigation was incomplete. Walsh stepped forward, his voice cracking with desperate bravado. "You can't prove anything. The evidence is legitimate." Park's gaze shifted to the human captain. And Walsh actually took a step backward. There was something in those eyes that spoke of battles fought in the cold vacuum of space, of decisions made when millions of lives hung in the balance. "Captain Walsh, isn't it? According to your service record, you were discharged from the Terran Marines for selling military supplies on the black market. Interesting career transition to colonial security." Park's voice remained conversational, but each word landed like a hammer blow. "I imagine a man with your connections might know where to acquire stolen military hardware." The command center fell silent except for the hum of computers and the distant rumble of mining equipment. Brock could feel his carefully constructed empire of corruption crumbling round him like a house of cards in a hurricane. "What do you want?" Brock snarled, abandoning any pretense of diplomatic courtesy. Park's demeanor remained unchanged, professional, courteous, but with an underlying current of absolute certainty. "I want my mother released immediately. I want you and your associates to surrender voluntarily for transport to Earth, where you will face trial in a legitimate court system in return. I will ensure that your cooperation is noted in the official record, and if we refuse, then I invoke Colonial Protection Protocol 7. The words hit the command center like a bomb blast. Every human in the room went pale. Well, Brock's reptilian features twisted with confusion and growing fear. "Protocol 7. He demanded. Walsh's voice was barely a whisper. "It's martial law, sir. It means the Terran military no longer recognizes local government authority. It means they consider the colony to be in a state of emergency requiring immediate military intervention." Park nodded, his expression grave. "Protocol 7 is reserved for situations where colonial leadership has become so corrupt or compromised that they can no longer protect Terran citizens. It authorizes me to assume direct military control of this system until proper civilian government can be restored." "You can't threaten a sovereign colony," Brock roared, his voice echoing off the command center walls. "We have rights. We have legal protections under the colonial charter." Admiral Park's response was delivered in the same calm, professional tone he might use to discuss the weather. "I'm not threatening, Chief Brock. I'm explaining. My mother is a 70-year-old woman who runs a noodle shop. She has never owned a weapon more dangerous than a kitchen knife. Yet your system has convicted her of trafficking military hardware. Hardware that, according to our investigation, was stolen by your own people." The holographic image zoomed out slightly, showing more of the Vengeance's bridge. In the background, Brock could see Marine officers in full combat armor, their weapons gleaming under the harsh lights. This wasn't a bluff or a political maneuver. This was a combat fleet, ready for war. "You have 1 hour to comply," Park continued. "Release my mother. Surrender the individuals responsible for this farce, and we can resolve this matter through proper legal channels. Refuse, and I will consider this colony to be in violation of Terran law, with all the consequences that entails." The transmission ended abruptly, leaving the command center in stunned silence outside. The fleet held its position like a pack of wolves waiting for the Alpha signal. 21 warships carrying enough firepower to reduce Nova 7 to radioactive debris, all at the command of a man whose mother sat in their prison on fabricated charges. Brock stared at the blank holographic projector, his mind racing through options that were rapidly dwindling to zero. He had built his power on the assumption that nobody would care about one small mining colony on the edge of nowhere. He had been very, very wrong. The clock on the wall showed 59 minutes remaining. In the distance, thunder rumbled across Nova 7's sky as the first shuttles began launching from the fleet above. Admiral Park Min-ho had come to collect his mother, and nothing in the galaxy was going to stop him. Brock's pride proved to be his downfall. Instead of accepting defeat with whatever dignity he had left, the Massive Vex security chief decided to make his last stand. He activated his emergency communicator, sending coded messages across the galaxy to every criminal contact he had cultivated. Over 6 years of corruption. This is Brock. Code Black Emergency. I need every favor you've ever owed me, and I need them now. The responses came quickly. The Razor Syndicate promised 3 attack ships within 12 hours. The Black Star Mercenaries offered a battalion of combat robots. Even the notorious pirate Captain Vex Gorlick agreed to bring his modified destroyer to Nova 7, attracted by the promise of military-grade salvage after the battle. What Brock didn't realize was that Admiral Park's intelligence network had been monitoring all colonial communication since the moment his fleet arrived. Every desperate call for help, every criminal alliance being formed, every ship moving toward Nova 7, all of it was being tracked, analyzed, and countered before Brock even finished making his deals. Admiral, Commander Lee Jiwoo reported from the tactical station. We're detecting 17 hostile vessels converging on our position. Mixed composition, pirates, mercenaries, and what appears to be a modified Krillian battle cruiser. Park nodded calmly, studying the holographic display that showed enemy ships approaching from multiple vectors. To his bridge crew, he seemed as relaxed as if he were planning a training exercise rather than facing a coordinated assault by some of the galaxy's most dangerous criminals. Interesting, he mused. Chief Brock has more connections than our intelligence. Reports suggested. Signal the fleet. Battle Formation Delta. Let's show our guests what real military precision looks like. The Terran fleet moved like a living organism, each ship sliding into position with mechanical perfection. The destroyers spread out in a defensive screen, while the heavy cruisers formed the main battle line. The TDS Vengeance took point. Her massive weapons rays powering up with an ominous hum that could be felt through the ship's hull. Down on Nova 7's surface, colonial citizens huddled in emergency shelters as their sky filled with warships. The planet's defense grid, what little of it actually worked after years of corruption and neglect, tried to lock onto targets but found itself hopelessly outclassed by military-grade electronic warfare systems. The first wave of criminal ships dropped out of hyperspace in a ragged formation that spoke of individual greed rather than coordinated tactics. 3 modified cargo haulers bristling with illegal weapons, 2 first-attack boats, and a converted passenger liner that had been turned into a makeshift missile platform. Enemy vessels. This is Admiral Park Min-ho of the Terran Defense Force. Park's voice broadcast across all frequencies. You are interfering with a legitimate military operation. Withdraw immediately or face the consequences. Captain Vex Gorlick's harsh laughter echoed back through the communication channels. Admiral, I've got 17 ships, and you've got 21. Those aren't bad odds. Stand down, and we might let your crews live long enough to use the escape pods. Park's response was delivered with the calm certainty of a man who had faced down alien armadas and won. Captain Gorlick, you have 17 ships crewed by criminals and pirates. I have 21 ships crewed by the finest military personnel in human space. The odds are exactly what I expected. The battle began with a spectacular light show as plasma cannons lit up the void between worlds. But what the criminals expected to be a chaotic firefight quickly became a surgical demonstration of military superiority. The Terran ships moved in perfect coordination, their weapons fire timed to create overlapping fields of destruction that no enemy could escape. The converted passenger liner exploded in the first salvo, Its improvised armor no match for military-grade. Plasma torpedoes. To attack, boats tried to flank the destroyer TDS Lightning, only to find themselves caught in a crossfire that reduced them to glowing debris in seconds. Gorlak's modified battle cruiser lasted longer, its stolen military shields, absorbing several direct hits before the TDS Vengeance's main gun spoke. The Dreadnought's primary weapon was a hypervelocity mass driver that fired projectiles at a significant fraction of light speed. When it hit Gorlak's ship, the pirate vessel simply ceased to exist. Vaporized in a flash of nuclear fire, the entire engagement lasted exactly 14 minutes. 17 enemy ships became 17 expanding clouds of wreckage, while the Terran fleet suffered 0 casualties and minimal damage to their shields. But the space battle was only the opening act. While the pirates were being destroyed in orbit, Admiral Park's Marines were already landing on Nova 7's surface. The assault shuttles touched down with military precision, disgorging soldiers who moved through the colony like ghosts. Guided by intelligence so complete that they knew every corrupt official's location before the shooting started, Brock made his final stand in the Colonial Command Center, surrounded by his remaining loyal guards and enough firepower to level a city block. It didn't matter. The Terran Marines used non-lethal stun weapons and tactical shields, neutralizing the defenders without killing anyone. They weren't there for revenge. They were there for justice. Within 6 hours, it was over. Every corrupt official sat in custody, their ill-gotten wealth frozen in accounts that would be distributed back to the colony's legitimate businesses. The fabricated evidence against Kim Hanna disappeared from the legal databases as if it had never existed, replaced by detailed records of how it had been planted and by whom. The Colonial Assembly, freed from years of intimidation and corruption, moved quickly to restore legitimate government. Their first official act was to publicly honor Kim Hanna for her courage in standing up to criminal extortion, despite knowing the personal cost. As Admiral Park prepared to depart with his prisoners, he found time for one last meal at his mother's noodle shop. The small restaurant had been repaired and restocked, its broken dishes replaced and its scattered supplies reorganized. Hannah worked behind the counter with the same quiet efficiency she had always shown. As if nothing had happened. "You didn't have to come personally," she said, ladling steaming noodles into his bowl with hands that showed no trace of a recent ordeal. A simple phone call to the authorities would have been enough. Park looked up from his meal, and for a moment the famous admiral was just a son sitting at his mother's table. "You're my mother," he said simply. "That's what sons do." The story of Nova 7 spread across human space faster than light itself, carried by merchant ships and military dispatches to every corner of the galaxy. It became legend in the bars and trading posts where spacers gathered, a reminder that humanity protected its own with the full might of their military machine. Alien crime bosses who had never given human civilians a second thought suddenly found themselves reconsidering their business models. Corrupt officials on distant colonies began looking over their shoulders, wondering if their next victim might have family in the Terran Defense Force. The message was clear and unmistakable: harm a human, especially family, and face consequences beyond imagination. Kim Hanna reopened her noodle shop the next morning. Word of her story had spread throughout the colony, and by noon there was a line of customers stretching round the block: miners, engineers, administrators. And their families all came to pay their respects to the elderly woman who had stood up to corruption and whose son had moved heaven and earth to protect her. Business was excellent. But more than that, Nova 7 had learned something important about the strength that came from family, duty, and the simple courage to do what was right. Some lessons the galaxy discovered were indeed written in Starfire. The end.